All right, welcome back to my white whale. It's my thesis project. We're almost ready to color grade, but today we're also not going to color grade. Next time I'll probably do my node tree because I'm trying to teach myself good habits, and I'm back to Walter Vapato's node tree, but that's for next time. This time it's going to be about performance. I had to check my notes. Computer performance, editing performance. You can make these adjustments at any time. You can make these adjustments, once your computer starts bogging down, once you have a bunch of color grading happening, but it gets messy. And so like everything, especially when you're dealing with complexity, especially color grading, whatever you can do before you start the color grade, especially if you can standardize it, that's better. So this is all about optimizing your machine for the color grade. Let me just show you what my machine is. So let's do there we go. So there's my dashboard. There's my Lightbox. You've seen it before if you've seen these videos. Yeah, most of it is Blackmagic 10-bit log that's in ProRes, and I need to I won't put a LUT on it. I'll actually do a color space transform, but again, that's for later. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Some of it's H.265, some of it's H.264, most of it's ProRes, so a little bit of everything. ProRes, rule of thumb, runs better, color grades better. The computer likes it more, at the expense of it's such a bigger file. So you have to have a lot of hard drives, and they have to be fairly fast to keep up with ProRes. That's the trade-off. I'm a big believer if you can get a CPU and a GPU combination that does H.264, H.265 encoding and decoding good, and most of the new stuff does, most of the new NVIDIA cards do for GPUs, and as long as you have a fairly up-to-date, in the last few generations CPU, you're probably fine. So this stuff is all 1080p. My whole timeline, I can pull it up, is 1080p, 23.9. You can do 4K if you want. I don't know. This whole thing was shot and mastered in 1080p, so there's no point in even considering 4K. For YouTube things, I would probably up-res it, still have a 1080p timeline, but when I was exporting it, export it as 4K just to trick YouTube to give it a little bit better compression. Yeah, so let me just show you what I got going on here. So, and I monitor all of my stuff all the time. I can show you that real quick. So in this upper left-hand corner here, yeah, this is just it's MSI's afterburner for PC. So we got CPU load, CPU temperature, RAM usage. So it's just by having this open, I'm at almost all 16 gigs of the 32 gigs of RAM. I'll get into that in a minute. GPU load 28% just by moving the mouse around. 53 degrees Celsius. I think that's the frame buffer. I don't really know. And then memory for GPU is 3415 out of 8,000-ish. I think it's like 7888. Yeah, if that doesn't mean anything to you, it doesn't matter. The short answer is basically I leave activity monitor up too. It's not super helpful, but it's useful. I especially watch the GPU because if you look here, GPU memory 4.3, but dedicated GPU memory is only 3.2 out of the 8 gigabytes. So my graphics card has 8 gigabytes of memory. Some of that additional GPU memory is being used by the RAM inside the system. So it's doing this thing called RAM swapping. Yeah, it is what it is. So if you end up have a project that ends up, because the color grade is so aggressive, it requires more RAM than what you have on your GPU, it will start pushing it to the CPU side of it, which is where the regular RAM is. That's a bad explanation. My point is, just because my GPU has 8 gigabytes of VRAM doesn't mean that it's going to instantly crash once it hits it, but there's a chance. And it'll start, Davinci Resolve will start complaining once I go past 8 gigabytes. For a 1080p timeline, which is what this is, not a huge deal. Again, this thing was shot and mastered in 1080p, so it's not a big deal, but I know for a fact this this computer can do 4K quite easily. Yeah, it's all about just, I guess trial and error, honestly. So the point is, most graphics cards these days have 8 gigabytes of VRAM. That's good for 1080p, especially if you're going to even grade pretty aggressively. At 4K, it's kind of pushing it. But then again, to get a graphics card that has more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM, because 8 is a very common number, 10, 12, 11 in some cases, 16, it's a huge step up in price most of the time. So I don't know if it's worth it. So obviously my GPU is a RTX 3060 Ti, which is a fairly recent sort of mid to low range graphics card. It was much too expensive when I bought it, but that dems the breaks. It is what it is. I can get away with everything I'm doing. It has basically enough power for what I need. The only problem is it would have been nice to have more VRAM, but that's just not the world we live in. For the rest of it, we'll do the memory, because that's the other thing that's really important. I have 32 gigabytes of memory, and in a color grade situation that I happen across all the time, especially if I'm dealing with something like red RAW footage, like 4K or 6K, or even a short timeline with 8K footage, I will max out the VRAM and the RAM, because once the VRAM maxes out, to protect itself, it'll start dumping it onto the RAM. I've maxed out all 32 gigabytes of VRAM, of regular RAM many times, and so 32 I would say is the baseline that you want. You probably want 64. If I were to upgrade this machine, which honestly it's getting a little bit long in the tooth. I know that's ironic to say when I show you the rest of the specs, but this machine isn't necessarily worth upgrading to 64 gigabytes of VRAM or of regular RAM. It's probably worth just a whole nother build, but we'll see. Time will tell. CPU, it's a Ryzen 7 2700X, which is several years old. It's fine. You just need enough CPU power that it doesn't bottleneck the GPU, and so this 8-core 16-thread CPU is perfectly fine. I think the 1700X, which would have been the generation before, probably would have bottlenecked this 3060 Ti, because GPUs are getting quite fast all of a sudden. All this to say, get what you can afford. At least if you're going to be color grading in a Windows PC, you need to get a graphics card with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and basically the most expensive graphics card you're comfortable paying for, that's probably the one you want. It is what it is, and any CPU more or less will match with that fairly okay, as long as it's within the last 5 years, I'd say. It's bad math. Anyway, the point is, that's all to say. Yeah, that's my PC. That's how I've spec'd it out. I also have, this is all RAID. This is why it all says D. I just have a bunch of old hard drives that are in RAID 0. So if something fails, they all go away. But that's the whole point. Is I dump all of my project footage, all of my I have an external hard drive that has the project that I literally just copied the hard drive onto my RAID on my computer. And then if it gets corrupted or whatever, I can always just delete the RAID or delete it and then go grab it from the hard drive again. So I don't leave the project hard drive connected. I think that's a bad habit. I'll probably do a rant about organization at some point, but yeah, my workflow has always been, except for those times when I was stupid and young, take the client's hard drive or take your hard drive, plug it into your computer, download the files, disconnect the hard drive, because you don't want to mess with their hard drive until you're in a situation where you're done and you can dump your files back onto their hard drive safely. You don't want to ruin their hard drive. Even if they have backups, it's just, I think it's a better idea. Anyway, yeah, so I think ProRes and H.264, H.265. This project has all of it. It's mostly ProRes, which is why it's all log footage. Some of these are H.264, which is just regular video file codec, and the H.265 is the fancier one. This computer, especially the GPU, is strong enough to decode H.264, H.265. But traditionally, the thought process is ProRes, even though the files are gigantic, so you're going to need faster hard drives and more of them. ProRes computers like more. H.264, H.265 requires more processing power, which is either CPU or GPU encoders. In the case of my NVIDIA card, which is, again, most cards that are current will have the H.264, H.265 encoder built in, so that's taken care of. This computer is hardy enough, especially with that NVIDIA GPU, to decode in real time. Certainly in 1080p, most of the time in 4K. I've had some trouble with 6K and 8K H.265 footage, but it is what it is. And then the other footage that I don't have in here is RAW. This computer will do it. I do it all the time. Red RAW requires a strong computer. It is what it is. If you want to color grade in ProRes, if you want to encode Red RAW into ProRes, I don't actually have an inherent problem with that, but people are going to frown at you because the point of RAW is to edit in RAW. It is what it is. Blackmagic RAW, because this is Davinci Resolve, is fine. All Blackmagic RAW is fine, but the other RAW codecs are tough and you need a hardy computer to do it. This is not that project. I'll probably do a video on that at some point, but this is not that project, so it's fine. No big deal. So, but yes, when you're color grading, you want the original files, or if you transcoded them into a better codec like ProRes, like a mezzanine codec, ProRes, DNX. I would even say GoPro Cineform, because this is what Linus Tech Tips uses. Yeah, once you're in that format, that's what you want to use, and you want to go into playback and make sure that the proxy handling, disable proxies. You want to color the original footage or the mezzanine footage. You don't want to color proxies, because you're just not going to have enough information, and the proxies might be 8-bit where the footage might be 10-bit. So that's that. For editing, proxies all day. I have no problem with proxies. Low-res proxies, H.264 to save file sizes, or H.265 really to save file sizes because it's even smaller. I do that all the time. For my little stuff, even though I shoot on my Blackmagic, which is in ProRes, I will re-encode it into H.265 just because I know my computer can handle it, and to edit in color grade, and it drops the file size from like 20 gigabytes to like 2. It's wild. So I think that's all I want to rant about that. So the other thing I want to talk about is the other saving graces. The first thing is, and I'll go into this further with when I actually talk about my node trees. I'm trying to adjust my node tree back to Walter Vopato's node tree structure. I like his node tree structure the best, but I just kind of fool around when I'm doing not standardized stuff. So I just wanted to show you this though. So noise reduction, sharpening or blurring. There's a few other effects that, any kind of weird O effects like, let's see here, flicker, anything that requires an OFX, so FX, or that requires like real-time processing. The big one that everybody talks about is noise reduction. Yes, as soon as you set it up, it will slow down your stuff. I can actually do it right now. So we'll go to noise reduction. We'll just do 1 frame, make it as wild as possible. So actually, let's get rid of that. So I'm gonna play it back, see what it does. It does it. It took a minute though. If you saw that, it took a little while to step up. And if you turn off noise reduction and do it, it still takes a little while. So that might be not even noticeable. But once you get an elaborate node tree and you start really taxing the RAM, because again the graphics card here, it will take all 8 gigabytes of RAM, depending on how many nodes and how complex your node trees are, and start pushing it onto the GPU or onto the system memory to try to save it, which is an order of magnitude slower than GPU's VRAM. So you do want to try to, if you want to go fast, or if you want to just have a healthier computer, have your VRAM below the limit of the GPU VRAM, because once it has to start swapping onto the other RAM, things get slow, and that's when things get unstable and maybe start crashing. But it's not as big of a deal as it could be. Admittedly, I haven't put Davinci Resolve on my MacBook Air yet. I have an M1. Haven't tried it. That'll be its own series, I'm sure. But yeah. So noise reduction, sharpening is another one. But anything that requires sort of real-time stuff. Fusion effects, although I'm not really a Fusion guy, that does it too. That it makes the playback slower, and so a way to work around that, especially if you have all these nodes and they're all going to have more or less the same noise reduction on them, is you convert this to, let's see here, save a shared node. And so now it's locked, which is its own thing, and I'll get into it once I start talking about the node tree. But what you can do is every shot that has the same node on it, the same shared node. So, oh man, I don't even know where that was. Anyway, my point still stands. If you save it as a shared node, then all the ones that have the same shared node, so we can do this, and this, all can have that shared node. And so when you go in and turn it off on one, it turns it off on the rest. And so I do that a lot. A lot of stuff that I know is going to touch everything, I turn into a shared node. Again, I'll do this in my node tree when I do that episode, but The really heavy stuff, especially noise reduction, especially sharpening, grain is another one. So timeline level, if you add grain, on timeline level, you don't need to turn it off because it's already touching everything that way. So, but if I had grain on the clip level or the group level, because I'll talk about groups during that node tree thing probably too. Yeah, anything that's going to be really taxing on your system, I turn off until the very end. And then, I'll adjust it at the very end if I need to. Noise reduction, usually I tweak it once and then I just leave it turned off and I finish my color grade, and then I'll turn it back on at the end and just, quality control check the footage to make sure that the noise reduction didn't like negatively affect anything. But yeah, I just keep it turned off and I use it as a shared node so that once I turn off, noise reduction here, it turns it off everywhere. So now it's back on. That whole thing. I think that was my speech on that. We can also talk about render cache. Let's see here. User, smart, none. Once it gets complicated, I'll start doing smart, and then so every time you stop working for however many seconds. I think it's on like a 5-second bus or timer for me. I don't know. It's not instant. Final Cut does this instantaneously, which is awesome, but also a reason why I don't trust Final Cut because it's not showing me its work. But yeah, I'll do render cache. I lost it again. Yeah, I'll do once things start slowing down, I'll start sending it to smart because user, I just find that user, because you have to define what's rendering. I think you just press. I don't know what the keys are even. Anyway, my point is, if I do user, I will forget stuff that needs to get rendered. So if you just do smart, it just sort of waits until you stop working, and then it'll in the background, ramp up the CPU and start rendering. That's great. I'm into it, but when I'm starting out, I just set it to none because I don't need it to be, helping me along. And then once you're doing your export, you need to turn off render cache anyway because you want the actual computer to in real time figure it out, so that in case there was an error or in case there was a mistake that the render cache didn't catch, hopefully the computer catches it. I don't know. I'm getting too far in the weeds. So anyway, yeah, I talked about proxies. Proxies are good for editing, not for color grading. They're just not. But the way Davinci Resolve calls proxies, everything else proxies, is kind of annoying. So that might be its own video too. The fact that I did a feature film where technically we were using proxies, but because they weren't Davinci Resolve created proxies, they were just considered clips. They were just considered regular clips, and so everything would be clips. And then when I needed to switch back from proxies to the original footage, I would have to tell all the clips that they're not clips anymore, point to the other clips that are real, and it would say, oh, gotcha. And it was a whole thing. I don't know. I'll do a video on that at some point. So the last thing is, let's go to the Lightbox again. So we need to break this up into scenes. I figured out, especially when I was doing that feature film, the longer the timeline, the more complicated the grades, the more cuts, especially if there's sound, which I got rid of, and sound effects, like effects on the sound tracks. Things get messy, and the computer bogs down, and the computer can max out its RAM and resources pretty easily. So what I like to do is I like to make each scene its own timeline, and then when I'm at the end, that's when I start to put everything back together. So there's some easy ways to do it. I'll get into that in a moment, but I just want to see here. So this is a scene. This is just a very quick teaser. Actually, it's not even a teaser. It's like a pre-roll. So there's a pre-roll, and then there's the picnic table thing, which goes to there. Then there's the actual who's that girl? It's just bit. So that goes there. That's another one. So we're at 4 now. So this is the concert line, I believe. The concert line goes to, here. So 5 is the balloon line. This whole thing was about staying in lines, which became really annoying to edit when everything was called something line. I'll admit that. 5 was balloon line. There we go. 6 is the palm tree. So that's going to be the concert. Again, standing in line. Can you still call yourself a hack if you lack ideas? Like you it's the absence of a contribution of an idea. Let's see here. This is still 6. In the car, I'm calling 7, even though technically it's supposed to be just outside, but it's definitely a different time and place. So that's in the car. And 8 is the therapy session, which with a birds flying, but that's fine. I'll just call that therapy session. 9 is back on the picnic table. And there we go, CWD. So 10 is the parking lot. And that is that. So there are 10 scenes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call these scenes 1 through 10. And so I think the easiest way to do it is, I have my timeline here. I'm just going to duplicate this 10 times and then call them scene 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then I'm going to cut them up correctly. So yeah, the idea is, again, add, don't delete. So yeah, we'll just duplicate. So let's call this timeline scene 1. Let's just call it scene 1, actually. And we'll duplicate that. Okay, so now that I got all my scenes made, I'm not gonna use timeline 5 color in any way. I can actually lock that right now, but that will be what I go back to. And again, when I'm done color grading, I will actually probably duplicate timeline 5 color and put it on its own thing. But yeah, and so now I need to go into each individual scenes and clip them where they need to be clipped. Also, if you're looking down here and you're seeing I have different tabs open, it's the same thing as this. The difference is this sort of looks at your whole, bin that you're in. This is just things that are selected. So if these like tabs are not open, just right there, timeline view options. I mess with this all the time. But yeah, I like to see what timeline I'm actually looking at, because I don't trust the viewer. So yeah, so here we go. Scene 1, and so yeah, so I will knock out all the scenes now. So here we go. Yeah, so what I'm doing is I've got one of the keys on my mouse to be delete, or I don't even know, blade tool, I think. So I don't know. Maybe at some point I'll go through mapping my keyboard to my mouse, or I'll just put a link to somebody who basically did it for me. I forget who it was. I'm sure I wrote it down. But I'm just clipping and then ripple delete. So I will. You can, and I believe R. Yeah, R. So R is select everything previously, and we'll just backspace it. And then what we will do is jump to this one, play it for a sec, and then yeah, so that way we can see it, and then we can do delete, and then T is my forward select, and then ripple delete, and we'll just take that out. Boom. Yeah, so that's that. In case I didn't mention it before, the reason I like to split these up into individual scenes is so that you can close the timeline. And in theory, maybe not immediately, but Davinci Resolve will start stop having to use all the RAM and use all the memory to cache multiple timelines. So if you have all these timelines open all at the same time, it's probably worse than having just one giant timeline with all your information on it. This way, you can segment it out. And if it gets really horrible, you can close your Davinci Resolve and then restart and just only have one timeline open. And in theory, it should only have the RAM usage for that just one timeline. So that's sort of like an end of days thing where you're so close to the end of the edit, but you're in sort of Adobe Premiere territory where you're afraid every single thing is going to crash. So yeah, eventually you're going to have to reconnect all these things, and that will be what is what it is. There's workarounds that for too. There's workarounds that also, in theory, you could export this, single timeline out as a ProRes file, and then stitch those individual files back together. It's not perfect. I've done it before though. It's not a big deal. So yeah, was that helpful? I'll catch you next time. See ya.